Hello and welcome everyone back for another Double A review. I am HatTopGaming and today's episode is on the Justice Serving, Freeze Dry Blasting, and Tower Ascending game in Robocop Unfinished Business. A standalone expansion to Robocop Rogue City where you're placed back in the stomping metal feet of Robocop and we need to stop a new threat based in Detroit before it's too late. Today's episode is actually a cross review between the Steam Deck and the Xbox ROG Ally X. I'll explain later. So as you watch the video, I have marked footage on either an X for the footage captured on the Xbox ROG Ally X or an SD for the Steam Deck, just so you know which handheld the footage came from. And of course, just as always, we'll be going over the same three things in story, gameplay, and performance before giving the game a rating out of 10. Also, don't forget to stick around to the end of the video for a sneak peek of my next review. But with all that out of the way, let's begin. Starting off with the story, the game takes place a few months after Rogue City and opens up with Robocop going to the old police station after it was sacked by mercenaries who stole some OCP equipment. Not to be held up in the OCP tower, which is outside of his jurisdiction, Robocop decides to go it alone and ascend the tower looking for the leader behind the attack and to recover the stolen OCP equipment. With the help of a mysterious stranger, you ascend the tower. The game was sort of advertised around the idea of a Judge Dredd-esque game, but in reality it's just more Robocop Rogue City all over again, but instead of patrolling the streets in between missions, you're placed in the hallways of the tower, which turns out to be a residential building. Once again, have minor police work to do in between missions. You still get to play detective a little bit, but overall the gameplay is almost the exact same as the last one, but with a different coat of paint on it. Also, it should be noted that no, you do not need to play the first game to understand this one. Moving on over to gameplay now, it's really more of the same. There are a few new enemies introduced, like security drones, and some new heavy units, plus these ninja guys with swords, but of course, Robocop will take care of all of them with no problem. The upgrade system returns here, and honestly, I was not a fan of having to upgrade Robocop from scratch all over again. I understand wanting to give players a sense of progression. I would have much rather just been OP from the get-go after having maxed out his stats in the last game. The OCP chips return as well when it comes to upgrading your gun, which I personally enjoy, though some of the later ones do go out of their way to give you negative debuffs, which is annoying because it kind of defeats the purpose of them. I would say the biggest change I noticed is how much more grounded the whole game really felt. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the last one, you had stuff flying everywhere, the environment getting torn up, blood spattering everywhere, and constant explosions. But this time, the spectacle is turned down a lot. I think most of that has to do with the fact that you're in a basic concrete building the whole game, so the ability to make things really pop or show off is harder. Really, I felt the game as a whole took a step back from the first one and toned everything down in a way. It's hard to express, it was just marginal differences everywhere that collectively made the game feel different and not nearly as fun as the first one. Enemies are also a bit tougher in this one for sure, as most of them have armor on, and there's no longer big open areas like the train yard from the first game that require you to go around looking for clues. It really is just much more of a hallway shooter with some bigger warehouse areas that enemies can use to better spread around in, but a lot of the combat encounters just kind of feel samey. There's also a point in the game where Robocop loses his gun, and man, that part drags on so hard it was really annoying. There's a handful of sections in this game that I found to be tedious, either due to enemy spawns or the game sending you into a funnel of enemies with no cover. Also, I forgot to mention, but you have these takedowns now. If you grab an enemy or they're near certain objects, you can click the right bumper and a cutscene will play of you throwing them into a vending machine, into a trash chute, or smash them into the TV, etc. It's neat, but you're still susceptible to damage while doing so you gotta kind of use it wisely. Moving on to performance now, this is directly correlates to the gameplay. When playing on Steam Deck, the game struggled to keep a clean 30 frames per second, even when I capped it at such. It would constantly freeze or stutter when transitioning from gameplay to cutscene, or even just after using the dash. The color palette was far worse, making the whole game look super dark and gloomy, and not in an atmospheric kind of way, but in a I can't see what's in front of me kind of way. Frame drops into the low 20s were constant. Mind you, I was playing on the auto detect graphics with motion blur turned off, and the game struggled the whole time while playing, and I have no idea why. Rogue City had the exact same graphics and combat, yet performed way better. I don't know if the devs can't figure out how to optimize things or what, because I'm hard pressed to believe the Steam Deck isn't capable of running this game, especially when it can run things like Trepang 2 with ease. On the other hand, when I was playing on the Xbox ROG Ally X, the game was having the same issues, but to a lesser degree. Playing in performance mode, I bumped the graphics to high, and I was getting a more stable frame rate in the high 40s to low 50s, but that was mostly just in residential areas with no fighting. Regardless of what device I was on, I was still dealing with lag, freeze framing, and stuttering. Even when I put the Rogue into turbo mode, I got maybe an extra 5 frames, but the issues persisted. Aside from an extra 10 frames, the only noticeable difference was how much better the game looked from a lighting perspective, which honestly made a big difference in my ability to actually see and shoot enemies. Also, just obviously made the game look better. I played the entirety of Rogue City on Steam Deck back in 2024, and I really enjoyed it despite the bugs and frame rate issues, and I highly recommend picking up the game if you haven't already. But with Robocop Unfinished Business, on the other hand, I can't recommend picking this game up on the Steam Deck due to just how poorly it ran, especially on the second half of the game where I felt far more compelled to just play it only on the Ally X so I could actually enjoy the final few minutes of the game. Because with all the explosions going off towards the end, I can only imagine how much of a slideshow the game might turn into on Steam Deck. Overall, I found Unfinished Business to be both underwhelming and a bit played out. The attempts to flesh out the story with these side missions where you play as characters other than Robocop proved to be very boring and bland, as when the game transitions to them, you already know how they're going to end, so it defeats the purpose of them entirely. The spectacle being turned down and the whole game playing in the OCP tower only hurt the experience, as nothing about its chapter stood out. The side missions return, which is nice, and I like the reprieve they brought in between shootouts. Too many of the enemies felt like bullet sponges though, as any enemy with armor, especially facial armor, needed an excessive amount of headshots before their armor would finally break and they could be killed. The game is constantly throwing new NPCs in your direction for story reasons that only further complicate things unnecessarily. I want to say I split my time up between the Xbox ROG X and the Steam Deck about 70-30. I'm actually really glad I waited until now to play it, because had I got the game last year at launch, I feel like I would have came away far more disappointed having only played it via the Steam Deck. Clocked in 15 hours to beat the game on hard difficulty, and I unlocked 21 of the 25 achievements along the way. Ultimately, would I say I had fun with the game? Yes, I would, but it was a step back from the previous entry. Maybe because I've seen it all before, or because it was truly done better the first time, I walked away from Unfinished Business a bit underwhelmed. If you only have a Steam Deck, I very much caution you against buying it, not because I think the game is bad, but unless you're okay with just putting up with constant bugs, unstable frame rate, and I have to imagine a really choppy second half, it's going to be a tough one. On the other hand, if you have an Xbox ROG X or a PC of similar specs, then you'll be able to enjoy the game much better, but you'll still run into issues. In the end, I'm going to give the game a rating of 6.5 out of 10. The overly prevalent technical issues and generally underwhelming feeling I got, both from the ending and just while playing the game, left me disappointed with the experience as a whole. Retailing at $30 or about $15 on key shops, I would say it's a fair price for a game that's definitely fun, but just stumbles in its execution and takes itself a bit too serious at times. But that's going to do it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's review on Robocop Unfinished Business. Let me know any of the comments or questions you have down in the comment section down below. If you're on a Steam Deck user, did I steer you away from buying this one, or are you still going to take the risk and buy it anyways? Have you played it already? If you have, let me know your experience down in the comment section down below. I'm HatTopGaming. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to follow me on social media, and I will see you all later. Peace.
Scale. Everything changed when that bloody atom plant went up in flames.
Citizens of Wyndham, there has been an increase in bandit activity outside the village walls.
Temporary quarantine, they said? It's been bloody years.
They're hiding something from us. Something terrible.